So Julius Malema, he was in the youth league at the time, said some things in a press conference. And I worked for a media house where I was the multimedia journalist for them. And the publication used to pride itself for having an internet server that never crashes.
Yes.
But that day, because of my story, it crashed 3 times.
Wow.
So that's one of the highlights of my career.
Hi, I'm Terrence Kommal, and I have the great pleasure of talking to Dieketseng Maleke, the editor of the personal finance paper, part of the Independent Group. Thank you for making the time.
Thank you for having me.
It's so awesome to finally meet after having spoken for a while.
Yes, it's been wonderful.
Great. If we look at an outset before, and I do want to cover your journey as a professional, but at the moment, what are the top 4 or 5 trending issues that people are concerned about from a readership related to personal finance, commerce, and personal interest in that space at the moment?
I would start by saying that there's a lot that's happening in the personal finance space. For instance, the two-pot system that will be in effect on September 1 this year. So people are reading about it. They want to know what's happening. And then we have the NHI bill content. Yes, yes. So people are also reading that.
Okay.
Since July is the savings month, people are also reading a lot and trying to find saving tips for them for their day to day.
So if we look at people talking about saving, NHI, there are large macro financial issues, and not just particularly in South Africa, but across the world. I mean, I just read a story yesterday. The US lost $1 trillion on their share prices across the board. And I'm like, $1 trillion, a lot of money to lose in share value in one day. And it included the likes of Meta, Tesla, Nvidia, and others. And that was huge news. But if we then bring it back to a local South African context, there are larger issues that are concerning people. And I think, in my mind at least, the concerns are more dramatic and extensive post-COVID. And I know we're a long time past COVID, but the financial impact and the change of systems are there. What are your thoughts on that?
My thoughts are that we still have a lot when it comes to interest rates. They're very high. And there was hopes that they will drop, but they're not dropping. And so the rand is also an issue. It's really trading lower than the dollar, the US dollar. So you find that a lot of people are going through a lot of they're struggling financially.
Yes.
Because of all of these things that happened. As much as I think we are faring better than when COVID was there, but still, we are still struggling financially. And so people are trying to find ways that they can make their money work and ways that they can stretch that rand. And that's where personal finance comes in. We give tips on how to save, tips on how to make sure that your insurance pays out if you make a claim. So yeah, it's an ongoing turbulence of things that are happening in the country, and not just South Africa.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But your paper also covers a lot more than just personal finance. You talk on macro issues like mining, economics, and larger things that people are interested in that directly affect their pension funds, their savings and investments, right?
Yes, we do. So we have business report, which also deals with a lot of what's happening in the industries, retail, mining, but with personal finance, I look at the consumer, how everyday life is impacted by their money.
Yes.
And my content is only about money matters, on how to handle your money, anything that has to do with money, your everyday life and your savings, your investments, and yeah, so that's the content. And also what I wanted to say earlier was that stories about SARS, because it's time for people to submit their IRP forms. So a lot of people read a lot of content regarding that. So I also provide content on that, on how to go to SARS and file your returns and all of that. Yeah.
Yes. And I'm not sure if you've observed in the stories you've covered, just in the last couple of weeks, and I can talk to some of my staff had come to me recently, including domestic staff, and said, "Doc, I got a SARS letter about my bank account, but I thought they won't see my time bank account. I'm like, they now see everything. So they've become very, I wouldn't say intrusive, but vigilant in looking for sources of income and funding.
Because I think there's a lot of scamming that's happening. People are not honest sometimes. So I think it's good that SARS has got knows exactly what's happening around so that people need to pay tax. We need the tax. Yes, there are times where people will complain that the tax is not used the way it's supposed to, but bottom line is the country needs people to pay their tax.
And I think that approach should be proactive, that if there's something wrong with what's going on, we often find armchair critics.
Yes.
Nobody's willing to say, well, what can I do about it? How can I contribute to this? And circling onto that, and if you're in the personal finance space, you talk to issues that affect people. But do you cover stories or success or failure stories related to entrepreneurship and opportunities to grow wealth and income?
Yes. But at the same time, even though we'll talk about entrepreneurships or entrepreneurs, we'll also look at how to start up their company, how to make sure that their company is out there. I like to also focus on the new companies, like entrepreneurs that are starting out, instead of people that are already established, because I find that a lot of people are struggling to get their companies going and getting the most important initial information. So I make sure that the content that I cover covers that a lot.
Okay.
Yes.
Has there been a larger uptake on entrepreneurship and self-sustaining income streams from the stories you publish?
I'd like to think so. I'd like to think so, but Business Report also covers a lot of entrepreneurship, more than I do, because they have a section regarding that. But I make sure that I also, on my side, help people to get that information on their startups and how to run your company and how to get not really financing, but how to go about looking for finance and yeah.
If we go and look at the kind of work you cover, and we obviously had a brief chat earlier, you've been in this industry for a long time and worked in various sectors from media and content production, video and multimedia, then finance, editing, etc., and then now leading personal finance. In your journey, what has been some of the highlights of this journey?
I worked for a media house where I was the multimedia journalist for them, and I went to a story to cover Julius Malema. So Julius Malema, he was in the youth league at the time, said some things in a press conference, and the publication used to pride itself for having an internet server that never crashes. Yes. But that day, because of my story, it crashed 3 times. Wow. So that's one of the highlights of my career. And also, with personal finance, when I talk about money, and also I get to include some of my personal stuff. The other week I wrote about how I teach my kids how to save, and that also I got a lot of readers reading that article. We had a lot of views for that article. So I think my most the most highlight is that I get to see the personal finance brand grow. I'm getting a lot of people joining. Today I saw, like, we had about I'm not sure how many new users on Facebook, like people liking personal finance. So it's been wonderful regarding that. Yeah.
But if you look at your journey, did you ever think you'd be doing this when you started?
No, definitely not. No, I've always been. I used to say I love general news, but then with age, unfortunately, being on the streets, running and trying to find a story, chasing sources.
Yes.
Sometimes it still gives some thrill, but for me, I just wanted something that I would learn more. I would, because I never thought personal finance will be where I'm at right
Yes.
now. I've always been like politics, even financial journalism. I never thought that I'd be in financial in financial journalism. But I ended up being there, and it's been just a wonderful, incredible journey. Yeah.
It's amazing how when you work in the finance space, at least in my experience, and I can talk back to school, one, I hated accounting because I'm like, what am I going to do with this? There's an accountant. Well, hopefully there'll be one. And you look back 25 years and you're like, I should have seen things differently. And even within my last, I would say at least the last 15 years, I've invested extensively in training courses, experiences, conferences, professional programs in different countries with different institutions. Because when you start to understand the fundamentals of, and irrelevant of the sector you're in, whether it's healthcare, legal, or retail, the fundamentals of the external influences are always going to be there. And knowing how to operate a business, can't obviously know what you're doing, but then understand how money works in the larger picture from your wallet through the entire system and the other way around. It changes your perspective and how you make decisions. Because, and you know, I used to tell some doctors about that, and that is why I do a lot of different things. Is there is a certain pride and great value in what you do. Like when you were a journalist, I can relate to that. But then when you evolve to running the system, it's a time value and a different experience. Because even with doctors, as much as everything they do is critically important for people's lives and well-being, when you make a claim to medical aid X, you're a line item on a claim form, and you're getting paid for a unit of time for a service, which is not dissimilar to a lawyer charging for that, or a retail store, or actually a motor mechanic doing the same thing. When you start to look at what you do, it's about selling product or service for payment and creating value and helping someone and providing something that they need, that may be there. But even in your experience, you're now looking at this from a broader level, saying it's not one story. How do I contribute to the larger, I don't like this word narrative, the larger conversation around people's personal finance?
My answer is multi-layered. When you spoke about accounting and how, for me, it's if I had paid more attention to mathematics and accounting and all these other subjects, I could have understood that our lives, they actually, these subjects, they speak to what we know, what we live every day. But now that I'm older, I'm finding that out, which is great. But then again, with the content that I use now, I try to also make sure that I inform my audience that you need to teach kids as while they are still young how to save, how to the value of money, because it's very important to learn while you're still young, so that in later in life, when you get to work, you know how to budget, you know how to plan, you know, because sometimes in some of us, when we get to start working, we don't know. We get approved for a credit card.
Yes.
We splurge. But yet that's gonna come back and bite you. So those are some of the topics that I deal with, that the younger the child, and as soon as they can understand what's happening, the money topics, they need to be there as well so that they can learn. So now that I'm learning a lot, from the content, because I have a lot of experts in the financial sector that are writing for me. It's great. I'm learning about investing offshore. I never thought about that. I always thought it was such a difficult thing to even consider. But now I know that it's really not that it's really not that difficult. I'm learning a lot about new sectors like the cryptocurrency.
Yes.
You know, I'm learning a lot about what's going to happen to my pension if I take, with the two-pot system being in effect, if I take it, I have options now. Do I take it? Do I not take? So there's a lot that I'm learning, and I don't think, as much as I'm a journalist and I love reading, I don't think some of the knowledge that I have now I would have gained if I wasn't part of the personal finance.
I think that's very important because I think of the last couple of interviews, two other speakers come to mind. One was Dr. Pali Lehoshla, the other was Dave Reddy that I spoke to recently. And both of them, as very seasoned professionals who've had long careers leading significant institutions, all came back to saying, we have a challenge with the education system. And I tend to agree with that because even if you look at the recent crisis of doctors saying, Well, I need a job. You need to employ me. And I'm like, wait a minute. If doctors are entitled to a job in the state, then every BCom graduate needs to get a job at the AG. Every lawyer needs to work for the state attorney. Everyone who graduates must then tell government to employ them. Then you become almost like a social state. But that's not true, because there must be some level of ownership of your own personal journey. But where the gap is you train people in a particular technical skill in a particular field. And there's a certain sense of entitlement, and I'm important, and what I do is important, and their services are important. But you don't teach them what underlies that. If you're employed, great, you've got a salary. But when you are self-employed and need to be self-employed, at some point you're going to be self-sustaining, you need to understand those yourself. Then you've got to teach that to your kids and share that with everyone you know. So I think there's a massive lack. And interestingly, we're talking about that now, and the other two speakers is USAF. There's an association of all the universities in South Africa has invited me to speak in October, I think, on the same topic. Where does entrepreneurship and finance fit in the large education system? And in my view, it should be involved in every single program. I know in the late 90s, I think it was early 2000s, computer literacy was compulsory in your degree. So you had to do Word, Microsoft, PowerPoint, or they won't let you graduate. But nobody compels you to understand how to run a profession when you qualify. There's no module on Business 101, basic finance. And I'm not saying teach them financial analytics, but basic business finance principles, at least broadly, and at least some basic economic and accounting principles of where do you fit in the bigger picture? It's more than I've got a customized number plate and a dedicated parking and they know who I am. Because at the end of the day, that doesn't help you fund your lifestyle or contribute to your family and the community at large. So I do think there's a massive gap and a flaw in the education system because we have a historical system. In South Africa, and I'm not sure if you know that, but in South Africa, if you want to do an LLM, you have to have an LLB. If you need to do an MBA, you must have the undergraduate qualifications. But us being a colonial country inherited a lot of the British education systems and structures. In the UK, you can be admitted as an attorney without having an LLB. You just write the attorney's exam, and if you pass, they'll admit you as an attorney with no degree. It's a competence test. If you want to do an MBA, if you pass the first module, they matriculate you into the program directly. No need for an undergraduate. And if you want to do an LLM in any field, you don't need an LLB because if you have an interest in the field, it's a research program. But South Africa has a very dogmatic and I think a very poorly structured system, which also talks to some of the old control systems that we still inherited. Now that we're talking about systems and processes, what is your view of the larger media landscape in South Africa at this time?
The media is struggling financially. But I also think that important stories are being told. And I think as journalists, I'm going to talk as a journalist because that's what I know. As journalists, we try and to tell stories, and in my case, I also try and inform. So I think the media landscape, there's a lot that can happen. There's a lot that needs to change, but it's there. It's happening, and yeah.
There are some contentious questions I've got for you, so be ready for it. But let's talk on the finance system. Yes, print media, and we've seen other major titles in the country, large legacy titles, intend to close in the next couple of months because they see it not as financially sustainable. These are listed groups, so they've got access to capital. But when you look at the broader landscape of South African media, where do you see the opportunities and what's missing if you compare it to international media?
I think we are also on par with international media in the sense that we also have websites, news websites, like reputable news websites. I think also it's people are not really buying newspapers, but there's still value in the newspapers. Like 5 years ago, people were saying by now print media will be dead, but it's still here. And people also still place a lot of value on print media than an online.
I saw it in the newspaper.
Yes, and if you tell them, okay, the article will be is going to be in print and online, they get all excited because it means, I don't know what it means to them, but
it's a credibility thing.
Yes. So as much as the landscape is changing as much as um, there's more that's happening in the media space, but I still feel like bandwidth is still expensive for online. Something needs to happen with the bandwidth so that a lot of people can actually access um, websites. And I think it has improved. A lot of people, and I think as much, I don't want to say it's print is dying. I don't think it is. But some of these companies are closing because the numbers have really dropped. And also, it goes back to the what we were talking about earlier. People choose and they decide bread or newspaper.
Exactly.
So obviously, it's going to be bread. So it's our economy. So it all boils to there's a lot that's happening around that leads to these decisions. And I'm sure it wasn't an easy decision to decide to close, especially those publications that have been there for a very long time. But at the same time, it's starting to show that media houses are really struggling. And I'm not sure, even if they have capital, but sustaining is also an issue. So it's going to be very interesting in the couple of years to come and see where print stays. But online is happening. IOL is doing great. People like a lot of people like it's getting a lot of views, that website. And it's not the only one. There are other websites that are doing really well. So it's that, even though bandwidth is still expensive, but I'm hoping as time goes it will get cheaper and more people will get more access.
Makes sense. I know a lot of media are still self-sustaining or mostly sustaining at this point, particularly the titles, your title and others. But when you look at a broader landscape, and I know it's just, a lot of people are saying, well, Joe Rogan's the largest podcast in the world. Everybody watches him. There is and maybe you could share some thoughts on this. Just yesterday, my wife said, Terrence, your interviews are way too long. I'm not going to watch it. Ironically, Joe Rogan does 3 to 4 hours, and he's the largest watched podcast in the world and carries significant influence in what he does. MK, a lot of the tech reviews on YouTube run extensively long discussions. People watch it because they've built a certain level of authority. But just last night, I saw Tucker Carlson is now the largest podcast in the world. Now, for context, as you'll know better than I would, when he was at Fox, the average view rate from what I've read was about 750,000 people watching every other show. His show used to get about 1.5 million. When he did the Putin interview in 48 hours, he had 72 million views on Twitter, or now X. He's now got the largest podcast as a one-man journalist. He's actually got a company called TCN, Tucker Carlson Network, building and producing content. Do you think, besides doing what we're doing, can current media do more to what consumers want and where they're consuming, in addition to the print titles?
So, like we spoke earlier, my background is on multimedia. And remember when I asked you how long is the interview? My training in multimedia, I was told that 2 minutes of an interview is sufficient.
Joe Rogan didn't do that training. That's why he makes money.
So I used to go and shoot videos of the whole day
Yeah.
and come back to the office and edit it to 2 minutes. And it will
Wow.
get a lot of views because you need to cut what's interesting and straight to the point. People, their their concentration span is so little because people are busy. People have things to do, and it's great that he's got that audience, that long, even though he has long winded videos, not winded, but long videos. But a lot of people, especially with news as well, need to go straight to the point. And the publication that I mentioned earlier, the media house I used to work for, I would have thousands and thousands of views, or I would just have one person tell their story in 2 minutes. People, if it's interesting enough, people will watch, So I think we we and also, like I said earlier, that bandwidth is expensive. So people don't want, some people can't afford
I see.
to be able to stream long videos because of data is still expensive in
And what
South
about
Africa.
MacG?
Because it's controversial. That was the other
But
point I
then
was
people
going to.
find the data and watch long form.
Yes, that's what I was going to say as well. You said he had an interview with Putin.
Yes. No, but MacG locally, the MacG podcast
Yes, yes,
show.
yes. I was talking about
Okay,
the
Carlson, yeah.
yes, Carlson. He had Putin. That's why his views shot up because it's a president.
But now he's sustained it. It's sustainably grown with tons
People
of
are
people.
always wanting to see who else is he going to bring. Is it still going to be interesting as they want to compare
Yes.
with that interview that you did with MacG? MacG is controversial. MacG sometimes he says things that no some people won't say on air. You know, he goes there.
Yeah.
People like controversy. People like things that are not the norm. People like interesting people. So they find him entertaining. They find him interesting. They find him different from what we've always had on
Absolutely.
our screens. So that's why he's growing and he'll always grow. And sometimes you might not like what he says, but he has fans who actually saying, yeah,
And it's his view. He's entitled to it.
yes, you know.
It may not necessarily be correct in some cases,
Yes, in
but
some cases, but a lot of people are always also having a different opinion, you know. People get tired of listening to the same thing or hearing the same thing. Having different views also helps with growing your audience.
with all the different platforms and the dynamic media changes internationally and locally, there's an underlying thread of people saying particular people see things in a view, as all humans do, or they use the phrase narrative, without necessarily agreeing or disagreeing whether they are narratives, which we all have views on. Where does the general principle of ethics lie in journalism?
I think um, going back to the basics, you are taught that firstly, you mustn't have a narrative. You mustn't decide. You must go where the story takes you. And secondly, as difficult, and I'm not sure if this is even possible, but I try to be objective. Yes, you need to tell the story as is. Then also you need to give a right of reply to the subjects that you are interviewing and or writing about, so that ethics you don't break the codes of ethics. You need to make sure that every story that you tell is as objective as possible, even if you have feelings about it and you have strong views about it. Our audience mostly is very intelligent and they know how to read between the lines. They know how to make up their minds. You mustn't spoon feed the audience or sway them in a direction where you want the narrative to go. So I do think ethics they play a very important part into journalism, and some of the stories that have been broken and journalists that did the work, you need to be able to do your work and go an extra mile, And if you learn about a subject that you're writing about, consult the people in the industry and speak to them and learn from them and continue adding more voices to your story. And yeah, so I think ethics they play a very important part of journalism, and we need to always remember that. And yeah.
In terms of journalism as a subject and a profession, there's a lot more people that contribute to content now looking at the various platforms, whether it's TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, uh, Twitter. There's multitudes of platforms that people consume content on now. And obviously, there's this new profession called content creators, which could be anyone. Do you see still a promising opportunity for people who want to study journalism or are studying journalism with a professional lens of working in the media industry?
Yes. Can I also say that I didn't study journalism. I studied public relations. So you need to have the drive. You need to want to learn. Journalism is not an easy field. Also, writing is a skill. Being a news reader or working in a publication in a publication house is not easy. So there's still a need for journalists out there. And we need trained people to produce newspapers and write stories, and you know, so the industry is still there and is still growing, and there are opportunities for journalists. So I think, yeah, it's the industry is here, and yeah.
I think, in my view and experience so far, the professional training of being a journalist or an editor helps you be balanced, helps you know how to structure a piece and work and where your obligations are, as opposed to, and there's nothing wrong with being a content creator because you're entitled to express yourself, but being able to package information in a way that somebody can digest it, it is balanced, and it reads well. Because content creators, some are really phenomenal, but somebody just starting out may not understand the structure of what's an intro paragraph, what's the next paragraph.
Yes.
So how do you link content? How do you make sure that it's relevant, and also you can write with a purpose of
Yes.
what you want a person to understand. So I personally believe, I actually trained in professional writing, but it's about being able to share that narrative to assist the consumer and also try and see through their lens. And are there opportunities for young journalists to contact you as an editor to look at their work and maybe contribute?
Yes, I've trained many interns and junior journalists in the field of journalism, whether it was multimedia or writing, and yeah, I'm really open to teaching others. I've learned a lot in my years in the industry, and I'm willing to teach um, the trade and how things are done, and just how people write is very important. People can be content creators, but being a journalist, there's also credibility that comes with that, because most of the time it's news that's very important. It's not your thoughts, it's what's happening, it's reporting on what's happening. And so yeah, I'm always open
That's
to.
awesome. And I can't miss this opportunity, but you said there's an importance in learning, training, and qualifications in the profession. Ironically, there's a large amount of journalists in South Africa who don't have qualifications and they get prime time, right?
Yes,
Well, they're also
yes.
in parliament, but yeah,
Yeah, but sometimes a qualification is needed. You learn how to speak and to do things when you have a qualification. But what I've found is that what you learn from even grade 1 to 10 to 12, grade 1 to grade 12, and when you learn what you learn from your tertiary and the job, totally different,
absolutely.
totally different things.
Absolutely.
That's why I studied something else, but I ended up in
But
journalism.
you had the fundamentals of the field.
Yes. So qualification is needed, but at the same time, you can learn. It depends on you. Like you were talking about how people are not taught some of the things because they depend on them to make them happen when they're entrepreneurs.
Yes.
It's the same thing in any career. It depends on you how much you want to learn. It depends on you how open are you to learn and fall and just you know get up and do it again. So with journalism, it's practice. You practice everything. You practice writing. You'll be told, I don't think you can write. You'll be told, but you need to persevere and learn. And it's not easy, like in any other career. It's not easy, but you just need to learn the initial parts of the trade. You should be fine if you put your mind into it.
And I believe exactly what you're talking to in your own personal story and what you want to share is that tenacity and commitment to make a difference. And that speaks directly to how you've arrived at where you are with your phenomenal journey. Thank you for making the time.
Thank you so much for having me, Terrence. Thank you.
And this was a phenomenal conversation with Dieketseng Maleke, the editor of Personal Finance. I really enjoyed some of her learnings and her sharings, and I look forward to sharing the rest of this conversation and many more with you on Business Report Insights with me, Professor Terrence Kommal.